The crack of a bullwhip sliced through the dusty air of Redemption Springs as Molly Winchester struggled against the ropes binding her wrists, her heart pounding with terror not for herself, but for her younger sister Emma, who stood trembling beside her on the crude wooden auction platform. The year was 1876, and the bustling frontier town had seen its share of misery, but nothing had prepared Molly for the horror of being sold like cattle after their father's death left them with nothing but his mounting debts. "Two fine specimens of womanhood here, gentlemen," the auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying across the crowd of leering men. "Educated girls from back east. The older one can cook, clean, and raid. The younger one's good with a needle and has a sweet singing voice. Bidding starts at $50 for the pair." Molly blinked back tears, keeping her chin high despite the shame burning through her. At 22, she'd promised their dying mother she would always protect 18-year-old Emma. Now, with their father gone too, that promise seemed impossible to keep. Their father's creditor, a cruel man named Silas Porter, had wasted no time seizing their small homestead and arranging this debt settlement that felt more like something from the slave markets that had supposedly ended with the war. $60, shouted a red-faced man with tobacco-stained teeth. 75, called another, his eyes lingering on Emma in a way that made Molly's stomach turn. $100, came a steady voice from the back of the crowd. The bidders parted as a tall figure strode forward. The man who emerged wore a black Stetson pulled low over his brow, casting shadows across a face weathered by sun and wind. His duster bore the dust of long travel, but his bearing was that of someone comfortable with his own authority. When he reached the front of the crowd, he removed his hat, revealing dark hair and piercing eyes that assessed the sisters not with lechery, but with something more complex, perhaps compassion. $100, the stranger repeated, looking directly at the auctioneer. "I've got 100 from the gentleman in black," the auctioneer announced. "Do I hear 125, 150? Shouted the tobacco chewer, glaring at the newcomer. The tall stranger didn't flinch. $200, he countered without hesitation. A murmur ran through the crowd. 200 was a considerable sum, especially for indentured servants in this territory. The auctioneer's eyes gleamed with greed. 200 once, twice. 250, came a desperate call from the back. The stranger sighed and reached into his coat, pulling out a leather pouch. $300, he stated firmly, and not a penny more. The crowd fell silent. Even Silas Porter, who stood nearby counting his anticipated profits, looked impressed. 300 going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in black. The gavel came down with a decisive crack. Molly felt faint. Sold. They had been sold like property. She squeezed Emma's hand as the stranger approached, paid the auctioneer, and received the papers transferring their debt obligation to him. Her sister was quietly weeping now, her slender shoulders shaking beneath her worn dress. The stranger approached them, hat in hand. Up close, Molly could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jawline softened by surprisingly kind eyes. "Name's Quinn Northrop," he said simply. "I own a cattle ranch about 20 miles west of here." Molly squared her shoulders. "What do you want from us, Mr. Northrop?" He looked momentarily taken aback. "Well, first I'd like to cut those ropes and get you both some water. Then we can talk." True to his word, he produced a knife and carefully cut the bindings from their wrists. A ranch hand appeared with canteens, and they both drank gratefully. "My sister and I won't be separated," Molly declared, her voice steadier than she felt. Quinn Northrop nodded. "I wouldn't dream of it." "And we won't." Molly struggled to formulate the words to protect them from what she feared most. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something like anger, not at them, She realized, but at the situation. Miss Winchester, I bought your contracts to keep you from men who would abuse your circumstances. You'll both have a home with me as paid help. Nothing more. My housekeeper, Mrs. Perkins, has been asking for assistance, and I need someone who can read and write to help with the books. Emma, who had been silent until now, looked up with red-rimmed eyes. You mean, we'd be safe? Quinn's expression softened. Yes, miss, you'd be safe. Molly remained suspicious. Why would you do this? $300 is a fortune just for household help. He looked away, gazing across the dusty street. Let's just say I've seen too many good people destroyed by bad fortune. My wagon's this way if you're ready to leave this place behind. With few options and even fewer possessions, the Winchester sisters followed Quinn Northrop to a well-built wagon. A young man with sun-bleached hair sat at the reins. Ladies, this is Thomas, my foreman's son. Quinn introduced them. Thomas, this is Miss Molly Winchester and her sister Miss Emma. Madam, Thomas nodded respectfully to each of them. Miss, Quinn helped them into the back of the wagon where clean blankets had been spread over fresh hay. It's not the most comfortable journey, but we should reach the ranch by nightfall. As the wagon pulled away from Redemption Springs, Molly watched the town recede into the distance. Her wrists still bore the red marks of the ropes, and her pride smarted from the humiliation of the auction block. Yet alongside these wounds was a flutter of something unexpected, hope, perhaps. Or at least relief. Emma leaned against her shoulder, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Do you think he's telling the truth? She whispered. Molly watched Quinn's broad shoulders as he rode alongside the wagon on a handsome chestnut gelding. I don't know, she admitted. But he's our best chance right now. Try to rest. The journey to the Northrop Ranch took them through stretches of prairie and rolling hills, the landscape gradually changing as they moved west. The spring air carried the scent of wild grasses and distant rain. Despite her wariness, Molly found herself lulled by the rhythm of the wagon and the expansive beauty of the frontier. By the time the sun hung low in the sky, painting the horizon in shades of orange and purple, her body ached from the rough ride. There it is, Thomas called over his shoulder. North Star Ranch. In the fading light, Molly could make out a substantial two-story house, several outbuildings and fenced corrals. Smoke curled from the chimney, and lantern light glowed warmly in the windows. It was larger and more prosperous-looking than she had expected. As they drew closer, a plump woman with gray-streaked hair emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're back earlier than expected, Quinn," she called, then stopped abruptly when she spotted Molly and Emma. "And you've brought company, I see." Quinn dismounted smoothly. "Mrs. Perkins, allow me to introduce Miss Molly Winchester and Miss Emma Winchester. Ladies, this is Mrs. Perkins, the finest housekeeper west of the Mississippi." Mrs. Perkins' face registered surprise, then understanding. "I see. Well then, you poor dears must be exhausted. Come inside, and we'll get you something to eat." The house was warm and smelled of fresh bread and coffee. The interior was simple but well kept, with solid furniture and a few touches that suggested a woman's hand had once been present: braided rugs, curtains at the windows, a vase of wildflowers on the dining table. Sit down, Mrs. Perkins urged, bustling about the kitchen. "I've got stew keeping warm and fresh bread just out of the oven." Emma sank gratefully into a chair, but Molly remained standing, uncertain of her place in this unfamiliar household. Quinn noticed her hesitation. "Please, Miss Winchester, make yourself comfortable. You're guests tonight. Tomorrow we can discuss arrangements." "Arrangements?" Mrs. Perkins raised an eyebrow. "The Winchesters will be joining us," Quinn explained. Miss Molly has experience with accounts and correspondence, and Miss Emma is skilled with a needle. You've been saying you need help, Mrs. Perkins gave him a long look that suggested there was more to discuss, but she simply nodded. Indeed I have. Now wash up for dinner, all of you. Quinn, Thomas can see to your horse. Over a hearty meal of venison stew, fresh bread, and apple preserves, Molly watched Quinn Northrop interact with his household. He treated Mrs. Perkins with evident respect, listened attentively to Thomas's report about the day's ranch activities, and made sure both Winchester sisters had seconds before taking more himself. It didn't seem like the behavior of a man with dishonorable intentions, yet experience had taught Molly to be wary. After dinner, Mrs. Perkins showed them to a clean, modest bedroom on the second floor. You'll share for now, she explained. Once we've cleared out the small room at the end of the hall, Emma can move there if you wish. The room contained a sturdy double bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a small dresser. A colorful rag rug covered part of the wooden floor, and white curtains framed the window. It's lovely, Emma said, her face brightening for the first time that day. Mrs. Perkins patted her hand. There are nightgowns in the dresser. They might be a bit large, but they're clean. We'll see about getting your own things tomorrow. We don't have any things, Molly said quietly. Everything was seized with our father's property. The older woman's face softened with sympathy. Well then, we'll just have to start fresh, won't we? There's plenty of fabric in the sewing room, and I imagine between us we can outfit you both properly. After Mrs. Perkins left, Emma sat on the edge of the bed and ran her hand over the quilt. It's nicer than I expected, she admitted. Better than, she stopped, unable to finish the thought. Molly sat beside her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Better than what would have happened if someone else had bought us, she completed. But we're still indentured servants, Emma. Don't forget that. But Mr. Northrop seems kind, Emma argued, and Mrs. Perkins is nice. Perhaps, Molly conceded, but we need to be practical. Our contract lasts 2 years. We need to work hard, save whatever wages we earn, and make plans for when we're free. Emma leaned her head on Molly's shoulder. I was so scared today, she whispered, when that man with the yellow teeth was bidding on us. I know, Molly soothed, stroking her sister's honey-colored hair, but we're together. That's what matters most. They washed with the cold water from the pitcher and changed into the borrowed nightgowns. The bed was soft compared to the thin pallet they'd shared in the tiny room behind their father's shop after they'd lost their home. Within minutes, Emma was asleep, her breathing deep and even. Molly lay awake longer, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, distant lowing of cattle, the occasional whinny of a horse, the creak of the house as it settled for the night. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the vast prairie sky, more than she'd ever seen in town. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. For tonight, they were safe, fed, and together. It was more than she had dared hope for when she stood on that auction platform. With that thought, she finally drifted into an exhausted sleep. Morning brought the smell of coffee and bacon, and Molly woke disoriented before remembering where they were. Emma was already up, washing her face at the basin. Mrs. Perkins brought hot water, she explained, and she left these. She gestured to 2 simple cotton dresses laid across the foot of the bed. Molly examined them. They were plain but well made, one in faded blue, the other in soft brown. They must be from her own closet. She said we could alter them to fit better later, Emma added, reaching for the blue dress. I thought I'd wear this one, if you don't mind the brown. Of course not. Molly rose and splashed water on her face, trying to wash away the lingering weariness. The events of yesterday seemed almost dreamlike in the morning light. Dressed in their borrowed clothes, they made their way downstairs. The kitchen was warm and bright, with sunlight streaming through the east-facing windows. Mrs. Perkins stood at the stove, turning bacon in a cast-iron skillet. "Good morning, dears," she greeted them cheerfully. "I hope you slept well." "Yes, thank you," Molly replied. "Can I help with anything? You can set the table if you like. Plates are in that cupboard there, cutlery in the drawer beneath." Molly busied herself with the task while Emma hesitantly offered to help with the cooking. By the time Quinn entered the kitchen, they had fallen into an easy rhythm with Mrs. Perkins. He paused in the doorway, observing the scene. In the daylight, Molly could see him more clearly, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was tanned from outdoor work, with smile lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he laughed more often than not. This morning he wore a blue work shirt, denim trousers, and well-worn boots. "Something smells wonderful," he said, moving to wash his hands at the sink. "Just in time," Mrs. Perkins replied. "The men have already eaten and gone to the south pasture. I told them you'd join them later." They sat down to a breakfast of bacon, eggs, and biscuits with honey. Quinn ate with the focused attention of a man accustomed to physical labor, but his manners were impeccable. "I thought we might discuss arrangements after breakfast," he said, glancing at Molly. "Unless you need more time to rest after yesterday." "I'm quite recovered, thank you," Molly answered, though in truth she still felt shaky when she thought about standing on that platform. "Good. Then perhaps we could talk in my study." After helping clear the breakfast dishes, Molly followed Quinn to a small room off the main parlor. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with a surprising variety of volumes. A sturdy desk occupied the center of the room, covered with papers and ledgers. "Please sit down," he invited, gesturing to a chair opposite the desk. Molly perched on the edge, her back straight. "Mr. Northrop, before we begin, I want to thank you for what you did yesterday. Whatever your reasons, you saved us from a terrible fate." He looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. It wasn't right, what they were doing. "The debt auction system is little better than slavery, no matter what they call it. Nevertheless, we are now legally bound to you for 2 years. I want to understand exactly what you expect from us." Quinn leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I expect honest work, Miss Winchester. Mrs. Perkins needs help running this household. It's grown too large for one woman to manage, and I could use someone with education to help with correspondence and bookkeeping. And my sister, Miss Emma, mentioned she's good with a needle. We need someone to mend and make clothes, curtains, quilts, all the fabric items a ranch requires. But if she has other skills or interests, we can certainly discuss those." Molly nodded slowly. "And our accommodations? You'll continue to share the room you stayed in last night, unless you prefer separate quarters. You'll take meals with the household and have Sundays free, except for essential chores. You'll each receive a small wage, which I'll record against your contract. If you choose to leave before the 2 years are up, you'd need to repay the purchase amount minus what you've earned." It was a fair arrangement, better than fair, considering the circumstances. Still, something bothered her. "Mr. Northrop, you paid $300 for us. That's far more than 2 domestic servants are worth, especially with a 2-year contract." He shifted uncomfortably. "The alternative was unacceptable. But why did you care? You didn't know us." Quinn stood and moved to the window, looking out over the ranch yard. 6 years ago, my sister was in a similar situation after her husband died, leaving her with debts. A man bought her contract at auction." His voice hardened. "He wasn't interested in her housekeeping skills." Molly's throat tightened. "What happened to her?" "She took her own life 3 months later." He turned back to face her, his expression grave. I was working a cattle drive in Colorado. By the time I returned, it was too late. I've regretted it every day since." The raw pain in his voice silenced any further questions. "I'm sorry," Molly said quietly. Quinn nodded once, accepting her sympathy. "So now you understand. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again, not when I could prevent it." "You're a good man, Mr. Northrop." He gave a short laugh. "No, I'm not, but I'm trying to be a better one." He returned to his desk. "Now, let me show you these ledgers. The previous bookkeeper left rather abruptly, and I'm afraid they're in disarray." For the next hour, Quinn explained the ranch's operations, the cattle breeding program, hay production, horse trading, and various other enterprises that kept North Star Ranch profitable. Molly was impressed by both the scope of the business and Quinn's knowledge of it. "Your father taught you well," she remarked, paging through a ledger. "My father died when I was 12, Quinn replied. "I learned by doing and by making plenty of mistakes along the way." Molly looked up in surprise. "Then how did you come to own such a large ranch at your age?" A shadow crossed his face. "That's a story for another time, perhaps. For now, do you think you can make sense of these accounts?" "Yes, I believe so. My father was a merchant before his investments failed. I helped with his books since I was 16. "Good. Then I'll leave you to get acquainted with them. I need to check on the herd in the south pasture." He stood to leave, then paused. "Miss Winchester, I want you to know that while you and your sister are legally bound by that contract, I consider you free women in my household. If at any time you're unhappy here, we can discuss alternatives." The sincerity in his voice touched something in Molly that she'd thought had hardened beyond reach. "Thank you, Mr. Northrop." After he left, Molly sat for a while, contemplating their strange turn of fortune. Yesterday morning, she and Emma had awakened in the town jail, where the sheriff had kindly allowed them to stay rather than sleep on the street after being evicted. By sunset, they had been auctioned like cattle. And now, they were in a comfortable home with decent work and a surprisingly honorable employer. Life on the frontier was nothing if not unpredictable. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Molly spent mornings organizing Quinn's accounts and correspondence, afternoons helping Mrs. Perkins with household management, and evenings sewing with Emma in their room or reading from the surprisingly well-stocked library. Emma flourished under Mrs. Perkins' kind guidance, her natural talents in the kitchen, and with a needle earning praise from everyone in the household. Spring advanced across the prairie, bringing waves of wildflowers and thunderstorms that rattled the windows at night. The ranch was busy with calving season, and Quinn often came to dinner tired and mud-spattered, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his manner that spoke of a man who loved his work. Molly learned more about him through observation and occasional conversations. He'd built North Star Ranch from a small homestead to one of the most prosperous properties in the territory through hard work and smart business decisions. The ranch hands respected him, and even the crusty old cook, Hank, spoke well of him. Yet there remained a reserve about Quinn, a distance he maintained from everyone, including her. One afternoon in late April, Molly was working in the study when a movement outside the window caught her attention. Quinn was in the corral with a spirited young mare, moving with the patient confidence of an experienced horseman. The animal was nervous, tossing her head and sidestepping, but Quinn kept talking to her in a low voice, gradually moving closer. Molly found herself drawn to the window, her work forgotten as she watched him gently slip a halter over the mare's head and stroke her neck. There was something captivating about seeing this strong, often reserved man show such gentleness. "He has a way with the difficult ones," said a voice behind her. Molly started and turned to find Mrs. Perkins standing in the doorway with a tray of coffee. "I didn't mean to startle you, dear," the housekeeper said, setting down the tray. "I thought you might need refreshment." "Thank you." Molly moved away from the window, feeling oddly as though she'd been caught doing something improper. "Yes, he seems very patient with the horses." Mrs. Perkins gave her a knowing look. "Quinn has always been good at seeing past fear to the heart of things. It's what makes him a fine rancher and a good man, despite what he might tell you." Molly poured coffee for both of them. "He mentioned his sister once. It seems he carries a great deal of guilt over her death." The older woman sighed, settling into a chair. Alice was younger than Quinn by 4 years. Their mother died birthing her, and their father wasn't much for raising children. Quinn practically raised Alice himself, so when she married badly and ended up in trouble after her husband's death, well, he's never forgiven himself for not being there. That's a heavy burden to carry. "Too heavy," Mrs. Perkins agreed, "but that's Quinn responsible to a fault for everyone around him and too hard on himself by half." She sipped her coffee. "It's why he bought your contracts, you know. He couldn't save Alice, but he could save you and your sister." Molly watched Quinn lead the now calm mare across the yard. "We're very fortunate he was there that day." "Perhaps it was fortune for all involved," Mrs. Perkins said cryptically, rising to leave. "This house has been too empty for too long." That evening at dinner, Molly found herself observing Quinn more closely. He'd cleaned up after his day's work, his dark hair still damp from washing, his shirt fresh. The conversation flowed easily around the table, with Emma excitedly describing the quilt she was designing and Thomas, who often joined them for dinner, reporting on the new calves. "How are you finding the accounts, Miss Winchester?" Quinn asked during a lull. "Much improved," Molly replied. "I've reconciled the past 3 months and started organizing your correspondence by business type. You receive an impressive number of letters for someone so far from town." He smiled, the expression warming his features. "A ranch this size doesn't run on cattle alone. We need supplies, markets, and information. I noticed several letters from a publisher in St. Louis. Are you writing a book, Mr. Northrop?" Quinn looked slightly embarrassed while Mrs. Perkins chuckled. "Quinn writes articles for agricultural journals," Mrs. Perkins explained. "Quite respected ones too, though he's too modest to admit it. They're just practical pieces about breeding methods and land management," Quinn said dismissively. "Nothing literary." "I'd like to read them sometime," Molly said, "if you wouldn't mind." His eyes met hers across the table, and something in his gaze made her heart beat faster. "I'd value your opinion," he said quietly. The moment was broken by Emma asking about going into town for fabric, and the conversation moved on. But throughout the evening, Molly found herself aware of Quinn in a way she hadn't been before: the deep timbre of his voice, the strength in his hands as he passed dishes, the intelligence in his eyes when he listened to others speak. It was dangerous territory, she reminded herself as she and Emma prepared for bed later. Quinn Northrop was their employer, the man who held their contracts. Any feelings beyond respect and gratitude could only complicate an already complex situation. Yet as she lay in bed, listening to the spring rain pattering against the window, Molly couldn't help but wonder about the man who had so unexpectedly changed their lives. May brought warmer weather and longer days. The prairie around North Star Ranch exploded into color with wildflowers, and the vegetable garden behind the house began to show green shoots breaking through the soil. Molly found herself increasingly comfortable with her role in the household, taking pride in bringing order to Quinn's business affairs and helping Mrs. Perkins manage the domestic side of the ranch. Emma, too, was thriving. Her natural cheerfulness had returned, and she had formed a close bond with Mrs. Perkins, who treated her with motherly affection. She'd also become friendly with Thomas, the foreman's son, who often found excuses to visit the house when Emma was working in the kitchen. One bright Saturday morning, Quinn announced at breakfast that he needed to go into town for supplies. "Would you ladies care to join me?" he asked, looking from Molly to Emma. "It's a pleasant drive, and Mrs. Perkins has given me a rather lengthy list." Emma clapped her hands in delight. "Oh, could we? I'd love to see the town properly." Molly hesitated. Their only experience of Redemption Springs had been traumatic, culminating in that terrible auction. But Emma's excited face decided her. "Thank you, Mr. Northrop. That would be lovely." An hour later, they were in Quinn's wagon heading east. Emma sat between them on the seat, chattering about the items she hoped to find in the general store. Quinn listened attentively, answering her questions about the town and occasionally pointing out landmarks as they traveled. Molly was quieter, enjoying the beautiful spring day and the sense of freedom that came with the open road. She'd been so focused on adjusting to life at the ranch that she hadn't realized how much she missed simply going somewhere different. "Penny for your thoughts, Miss Winchester," Quinn said, glancing at her over Emma's head. "I was just appreciating the journey," she replied. "It's been some time since I've traveled anywhere, even just to town." He nodded in understanding. "The prairie has its own beauty. I never tire of it, especially in spring." As they crested a rise, Redemption Springs appeared in the distance, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a shallow valley. Molly tensed involuntarily, memories of the auction flooding back. Quinn must have noticed because he said quietly, "We don't have to stay long if it makes you uncomfortable." "No, I'm fine," Molly insisted. "It's just memories, understandable." He gave her a reassuring smile, "But perhaps we can create some better ones today." The town looked different in the spring sunshine than it had on that gray March day. Flowers bloomed in boxes beneath windows, and fresh paint brightened several storefronts. Children played in the schoolyard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Quinn pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store. "I suggest we start here, then visit the apothecary and perhaps stop at the cafe for lunch before heading back." He helped both sisters down from the wagon, his hand warm and steady as it briefly held Molly's. She found herself wishing the contact had lasted longer, then immediately chastised herself for the thought. Inside the store, Emma was immediately drawn to a display of fabric, while Quinn consulted Mrs. Perkins' list with the shopkeeper. Molly wandered the aisles, enjoying the simple pleasure of examining goods without the pressure of purchase. She was examining a set of writing paper when she became aware of whispered conversations and sidelong glances from other customers. Those girls from the auction. Living out at Northrop's place. Wonder what kind of work they're really doing. Molly's cheeks burned with humiliation. Of course the townspeople would remember the auction. Of course they would gossip about two unmarried women living on a bachelor's ranch. She was about to retreat to Quinn's side when a woman's voice spoke loudly enough for the entire store to hear. "Well, I think it's disgraceful. Dead auction or not, a respectable man doesn't keep two young women in his house without proper chaperoning." Molly turned to see a thin woman in an expensive dress, addressing a circle of ladies who were all now staring openly at her. Quinn had also heard, his tall frame stiffening as he turned from the counter. Before either of them could speak, however, Mrs. Perkins appeared in the doorway, her arms full of packages from the millinery next door. "Why, Mrs. Harrington," she said loudly, approaching the gossiping woman. "How lovely to see you again. I've been meaning to invite you out to North Star to see our new parlor curtains. Miss Emma has such talent with a needle, she's been an absolute blessing to have in the household." And Miss Molly has finally brought order to those dreadful account books. I don't know how we managed before they joined us." The unexpected arrival of the respected housekeeper, speaking so warmly of the Winchester sisters, caused an immediate shift in the atmosphere. Mrs. Harrington looked flustered. "Mrs. Perkins, I didn't realize you were in town today." "Just picking up a few things, Mrs." Perkins said cheerfully, then lowered her voice to a stage whisper. "And I wanted to speak to Reverend Miller about the church social next month. Quinn has generously offered to host it at the ranch this year. You and Mr. Harrington will come, won't you?" The complete reversal of the gossip from scandalous situation to respectable church social left Mrs. Harrington speechless. She could only nod weakly. "Excellent. Now, Quinn, dear, have you found everything on my list, Mrs.?" Perkins sailed toward him as if nothing unusual had occurred, but the wink she gave Molly spoke volumes. Quinn's face showed a mixture of amusement and gratitude as he introduced Mrs. Perkins to the shopkeeper. Emma, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded, joined Molly with an armful of fabric. "Isn't this calico beautiful? Mrs. Perkins said I could make a new dress." Molly hugged her sister, thankful for her innocence. "It's perfect for you." They completed their shopping with Mrs. Perkins maintaining a steady stream of conversation that effectively silenced any further gossip. When they stepped back onto the boardwalk, Quinn turned to the housekeeper with raised eyebrows. "A church social at North Star." Mrs. Perkins adjusted her bonnet with a satisfied smile. "Well, it seemed the quickest way to quash that nonsense. Unless you object," Quinn laughed, a full, rich sound that Molly realized she had rarely heard. "Not at all. It's a fine idea." "I thought so." Mrs. Perkins looked pleased with herself. "Now, I believe you mentioned lunch at the cafe." The rest of their visit to town passed pleasantly, with Mrs. Perkins' presence effectively shielding them from further uncomfortable encounters. By the time they loaded their purchases into the wagon and started the journey home, Molly felt much better about Redemption Springs. "Thank you for coming to our rescue, Mrs. Perkins," she said as they traveled. "That was quick thinking about the church social." The older woman patted her hand. "I've lived in these parts long enough to know how to handle gossip, dear. Besides, it's high time North Star hosted something." "The place has been too quiet since," she stopped abruptly. "Since when?" Emma asked innocently. Mrs. Perkins and Quinn exchanged a glance. "Since I've been busy with ranch expansion," Quinn said smoothly. "But Mrs. Perkins is right. It would be good to open the doors again." Molly sensed there was more to the story, but didn't press. Instead, she enjoyed the beautiful afternoon and the companionship of the small group that was beginning to feel, unexpectedly, like family. That night, as Molly brushed her hair before bed, Emma sat cross-legged on their shared bed, sewing beads onto a small pouch. "You like it here, Molly?" she asked suddenly. Molly paused, brush in mid-stroke. "At North Star, yes, I suppose I do. I love it," Emma declared. "Mrs. Perkins is teaching me so many things, and everyone is so kind. Even when we're not working, it doesn't feel like we're servants. That's because Mr. Northrop treats his people well. But we shouldn't forget our situation, Emma. We're still bound by that contract." Emma set down her sewing. "I know. But is it so wrong to be happy here, to feel like we belong?" Molly resumed brushing, considering her sister's words. "Was it wrong to feel at home at North Star, to look forward to breakfast conversations with Quinn, to enjoy Mrs. Perkins' motherly fussing, to take pride in bringing order to the ranch's affairs?" "No," she admitted finally. "It's not wrong. We're fortunate in many ways. Thomas says Mr. Northrop never bought anyone's contract before ours," Emma said casually. "He says Mr. Northrop hardly ever goes to town at all if he can help it." Molly set down her brush. You and Thomas seem to talk quite a bit." A blush crept up Emma's cheeks. "He's nice, and he tells good stories about growing up on the ranch." "Emma," Molly said carefully, "you're very young and we're in a vulnerable position here. Please be careful about forming attachments." "Thomas is just a friend," Emma protested. "Besides, I've seen how you look at Mr. Northrop when you think no one's watching." It was Molly's turn to blush. "That's different. I admire and respect him as our employer." Emma gave her a skeptical look. "If you say so, but I think he looks at you the same way." "Don't be ridiculous," Molly said sharply, then immediately regretted her tone when she saw Emma's hurt expression. "I'm sorry. I just don't want either of us to confuse kindness with something else. Our situation is complicated enough." Emma nodded, returning to her sewing. "I understand. But Molly, if something real did happen with Thomas or with Mr. Northrop, would that be so terrible? Life is short." "Papa always said that." Molly didn't have an answer. Instead, she blew out the lamp and climbed into bed, but sleep was long in coming as Emma's words echoed in her mind. The following weeks were busy with preparations for the church social. Mrs. Perkins approached the event with military precision, assigning tasks to everyone in the household. Emma was put in charge of decorations, while Molly was tasked with organizing invitations and planning activities. "A good social needs games," Mrs. Perkins declared. "Something for everyone, from the children to the elders." Quinn seemed amused by the flurry of activity, but he supported the plans wholeheartedly, authorizing purchases and offering suggestions. Molly noticed that he seemed more relaxed, laughing more often and staying longer at the dinner table to join in conversations. One evening, about a week before the social, Molly was working late in the study, finalizing the guest list. Quinn entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Mrs. Perkins thought you might need this," he said, placing 1 cup on the desk. "She's gone to bed and Emma is still sewing ribbons for the barn decorations." "Thank you." Molly accepted the coffee gratefully. "I'm almost finished here." Instead of leaving, Quinn settled into the chair opposite her desk. "You've done an exceptional job with all this. The ranch accounts have never been so organized, and now you're planning what might be the biggest social event Redemption Springs has seen in years." Molly felt a warm glow at his praise. "It's been enjoyable, actually. I've always liked organizing things." "I've noticed." He smiled, the expression softening his strong features. "You've brought order to more than just the ledgers, Miss Winchester. The whole household runs more smoothly since you and your sister arrived." "Mrs. Perkins deserves most of the credit. She's a remarkable woman." "She is, but she's also 70 years old and was overworked before you came." He took a sip of his coffee. "I should have hired help for her years ago, but after Alice died, I withdrew from people from society. It seemed easier." Molly set down her pen. "Mrs. Perkins mentioned there hadn't been gatherings at the ranch for some time." Quinn nodded, his eyes distant. "The last one was Alice's wedding. 7 years ago now. I'm sorry, it must be difficult having those memories." It is." He met her gaze. "But sometimes new memories can help heal old wounds." There was something in his voice, a warmth that made Molly's heart beat faster. She looked down at the guest list, suddenly unable to meet his eyes. "Mr. Northrop." "Quinn," he interrupted gently. "After all these months, I think you could call me Quinn." "Quinn," she repeated, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. We appreciate everything you've done for us. Emma and I were in a desperate situation, and you gave us safety, comfort, purpose. I don't know how we can ever repay such kindness." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "You don't need to repay anything, Molly. Having you and Emma here, seeing how you've brightened this place. That's payment enough." The use of her given name, spoken in his deep voice, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening chill. They looked at each other across the desk, something unspoken passing between them. Quinn was the first to break the silence, clearing his throat and standing. "It's late. You should get some rest. The social committee is meeting tomorrow after church, isn't it?" "Yes," Molly said, grateful for the return to practical matters. "Mrs. Harrington and Mrs. Peterson are bringing their lists of final requirements. Then I'll make myself scarce," he said with a smile. "Good night, Molly. Good night, Quinn." After he left, Molly sat for a long time, her coffee cooling untouched, her thoughts in disarray. Something had shifted between them tonight, something significant, something both thrilling and terrifying in its implications. She was falling in love with Quinn Northrop. Perhaps had been for weeks, without fully acknowledging it, and if she wasn't mistaken, he felt something for her as well. But what could come of it? She was bound to him by a contract, legally his employee for another 20 months. How could there be anything equal or honorable between them with that imbalance of power? Molly finally gathered her papers and headed upstairs, her mind troubled despite the warmth in her heart. The day of the church social dawned clear and warm, a perfect late May Sunday. The ranch had been transformed, the barn swept and decorated with ribbons and wildflowers, tables set up in the shade of large oak trees, games arranged on the expansive lawn. Emma had outdone herself with the decorations, and Mrs. Perkins had supervised the preparation of enough food to feed the entire county. Molly stood on the porch, surveying the preparations with satisfaction. She wore her new dress, made from fabric Quinn had insisted on purchasing in town, a pretty blue cotton with a white collar and cuffs. Emma had helped her style her hair, arranging the dark waves in a becoming twist secured with tortoiseshell combs borrowed from Mrs. Perkins. "You look beautiful," said a voice behind her. She turned to find Quinn standing in the doorway. He was dressed more formally than usual in a black suit, white shirt, and string tie. His dark hair was neatly combed and he'd trimmed his beard. He looked handsome and distinguished, every inch the successful rancher. "Thank you," she said, feeling suddenly shy. "You look very nice yourself." He joined her on the porch, looking out over the ranch. "I never thought I'd be doing this again, opening North Star for a social. When Alice died, I wanted to shut everything and everyone out." "What changed?" Molly asked quietly. His eyes met hers. "You did. You and Emma. You reminded me that life goes on, that joy is still possible." Before Molly could respond, the sound of wagons approaching signaled the arrival of the first guests. The moment of intimacy was gone, replaced by the duties of hosts. The social was a resounding success. Families from Redemption Springs and surrounding ranches filled the North Star property with laughter and conversation. Children raced across the lawn playing games. Young couples strolled through Mrs. Perkins' garden, and elders gathered in the shade to discuss weather and politics. Molly found herself busy throughout the afternoon, ensuring everyone had food and drink, organizing games, and introducing newcomers to others. She caught glimpses of Quinn doing the same, talking earnestly with a group of ranchers, helping a child retrieve a ball from a tree, listening patiently to an elderly woman's reminiscences. Late in the afternoon, as the gathering was beginning to wind down, Reverend Miller called for everyone's attention. The crowd gathered around the porch where he stood with Quinn. "I want to thank Quinn Northrop for hosting us today," the Reverend announced. "It's been too long since North Star opened its gates for a community gathering, and I speak for everyone when I say we're mighty glad to be here." There was a round of applause, during which Quinn looked slightly uncomfortable but nodded in acknowledgement. "I also want to recognize Miss Molly Winchester and Miss Emma Winchester," Reverend Miller continued, gesturing for them to join him. These fine young ladies have brought new life to North Star Ranch, and today's wonderful event is largely due to their efforts." Molly reluctantly moved forward, Emma at her side. She was acutely aware of the curious looks from those who remembered their arrival in town. "Thank you, Reverend, but Mrs. Perkins deserves most of the credit," she said, trying to deflect attention. "Nonsense," Mrs. Perkins called from the crowd. "These girls have worked tirelessly, and they're a blessing to this ranch." There was more applause, and Molly felt Quinn's hand lightly touch the small of her back in a gesture of support. The simple contact sent warmth spreading through her. As the guests began to depart, many stopped to personally thank Molly and Emma. Mrs. Harrington, who had been so critical in the store, was effusive in her praise of the decorations and refreshments. Even the town's most prominent citizens treated them with respect, the scandal of the auction seemingly forgotten. By sunset, only the North Star household remained, tired but satisfied with the day's events. They sat on the porch, watching the last golden rays stretch across the prairie. "That went better than I expected," Mrs. Perkins declared, sipping lemonade. "Not a single argument or overturned punch bowl." "The games were such fun," Emma said. "Did you see how many children came? Thomas was wonderful with the little ones." "He's a good young man," Quinn agreed. "His father has taught him well." Molly leaned back in her chair, exhausted but content. "Everyone seemed to enjoy themselves. I think we've successfully rehabilitated the Winchester sisters in the eyes of Redemption Springs society." Quinn laughed. "As if you needed rehabilitating." "But yes, I believe public opinion has shifted decidedly in your favor." "Thanks to you," Molly said softly. His eyes met hers. "No, Molly, thanks to who you are." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken feelings, until Mrs. Perkins cleared her throat. "Well, this old woman is ready for bed. Emma, would you help me with these glasses?" Emma looked from Molly to Quinn and back, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "Of course, Mrs. Perkins." After they left, a comfortable silence fell. The evening air was sweet with the scent of prairie grass and wildflowers. Stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. "I meant what I said earlier," Quinn said finally. "You've changed things here, Molly, changed me." "I'm glad," she replied. "This place has changed us too, given us a home when we had none." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I want it to be your home, not just a place where you work. I want—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. Molly's heart pounded. "What do you want, Quinn?" "Something I have no right to ask for." He stood and walked to the edge of the porch, his back to her. "You came here not by choice but by circumstance. You're bound by a contract I purchased. How can I speak of feelings when there's that inequality between us?" Molly rose and moved to stand beside him. "Do you think I don't understand the complexity of our situation? I've thought of nothing else for weeks." He looked at her with surprise. "You have, of course." "I've questioned every feeling, doubted every moment of happiness, reminded myself a dozen times a day of our legal arrangement." She took a deep breath. "But the heart doesn't always follow legal documents, Quinn." Hope dawned in his eyes. "Molly, are you saying—" "I'm saying that despite every logical argument against it, I care for you. Deeply." The admission made her feel both vulnerable and strangely free. "And if you feel something similar, perhaps we should acknowledge it rather than pretend otherwise." Quinn took her hand, his touch gentle. "I've cared for you since that first day in town, though I tried not to. It seemed wrong given how we met. But these past months, working beside you, seeing your strength and kindness, I've fallen in love with you, Molly Winchester." The words sent a thrill through her. "And I with you, Quinn Northrop." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "What do we do now?" Molly smiled. "We take our time. We get to know each other properly without the shadows of contracts and obligations. And when the time is right, we'll know it." Quinn nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'd like that. Very much." They stood together as twilight deepened into night, hands joined, hearts aligned, the future suddenly bright with possibility. Summer brought long, sun-drenched days to North Star Ranch. The cattle grew fat on rich prairie grass, the garden yielded a bounty of vegetables, and the household settled into a harmonious rhythm that made the earlier tensions seem like distant memories. Following their conversation on the porch after the social, Quinn and Molly embarked on a careful courtship. They took Sunday afternoon rides across the ranch, picnicked by the creek that marked the western boundary of the property, and spent evenings on the porch talking about books, dreams, and memories. Quinn told her stories of his childhood, of learning ranching from grizzled cowboys after his father died, of building North Star acre by acre. Molly shared tales of her Eastern upbringing, her mother's gentle influence, and her father's ambitious schemes that ultimately led to their downfall. They were never alone. Propriety and Quinn's respect for Molly's reputation ensured that Mrs. Perkins or Emma or Thomas was always nearby. But in these shared moments, their connection deepened beyond mere attraction to something more profound. Emma, meanwhile, had formed a close friendship with Thomas that seemed on the verge of blossoming into something more. The young man sought increasingly transparent excuses to visit the house, and Emma's cheeks grew pink whenever he was mentioned. "You should invite Thomas to dinner more often," Molly suggested to Quinn one evening as they sat in the study reviewing the month's accounts. "I think Emma would enjoy that." Quinn looked up from the ledger with amusement. "Thomas has dined here 3 times this week already. Any more and he might as well move in." "He's a good young man," Molly said, echoing Quinn's own words from months before. "The best," Quinn agreed. "His father has been my foreman for 15 years, and Thomas has worked alongside him since he was tall enough to reach a horse's bridle." He studied Molly's expression. "You approve of his attention to your sister. Emma is young, but she has a good heart and sound judgment, and she seems happy when he's around." "Like you seem happy when I'm around?" Quinn asked, his voice teasing but his eyes serious. Molly felt her cheeks warm. "Perhaps." He reached across the desk to take her hand. "I never expected this, Molly. When I saw you and Emma on that auction platform, I was thinking only of saving you from a terrible fate, not finding my own happiness." "Life has a way of surprising us," she said softly. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Molly knew with certainty that despite all the complications of their beginning, her future was here, with this man, on this ranch that had become home. In early July, Mrs. Perkins announced that the annual Independence Day celebration would be held in town, with all the local ranches contributing food and entertainment. "We should all attend," she declared at breakfast. "After the success of our social, people will expect to see North Star represented." Quinn nodded. "We'll close the ranch except for essential hands. Everyone deserves a day of celebration." Emma clapped her hands in delight. "Will there be dancing?" Thomas mentioned a dance. "Yes, there's always dancing in the evening," Mrs. Perkins confirmed. "And games, speeches, food, a proper celebration." Molly found herself looking forward to the event. Their last visit to town had gone well, and the idea of celebrating with the community appealed to her social nature. The 4th of July dawned clear and hot. They traveled to town in 2 wagons, Quinn driving Molly, Emma, and Mrs. Perkins in the first, and Thomas following with several ranch hands in the second. Emma looked particularly pretty in a new yellow dress she had made herself, with a matching ribbon in her honey-colored hair. Redemption Springs was decorated with flags and bunting, the main street closed to traffic, and filled with tables and chairs. A platform had been erected in front of the courthouse for speeches and performances, and children darted about with sparklers and small flags. Their group was warmly welcomed. Quinn was immediately drawn into conversation with other ranchers, while Mrs. Perkins joined the ladies arranging the food tables. Emma, with Thomas never far from her side, volunteered to help with the children's games. Molly found herself enjoying the festive atmosphere, exchanging pleasantries with townspeople who now greeted her as a respected member of the community rather than a scandalous curiosity. She was helping arrange desserts when a familiar voice made her stiffen. "Well, if it isn't Miss Winchester, looking quite the proper lady." She turned to find Silas Porter, the man who had arranged the auction of their contracts, watching her with cold eyes. He was expensively dressed as always, his manner suggesting he considered himself above the frontier town and its celebrations. "Mr. Porter," Molly acknowledged with a curt nod. "I must say, you've landed on your feet since our last encounter," he continued, his voice pitched to carry to nearby tables. "Northrop must be quite satisfied with your services." The insinuation was unmistakable. Before Molly could respond, another voice cut in. "Mr. Porter, I don't believe we've been properly introduced." Quinn had appeared at Molly's side, his expression pleasant but his eyes hard. He extended his hand. "Quinn Northrop." Porter hesitated before briefly shaking Quinn's hand. "Silas Porter, I believe you and I have done business after a fashion." "Indeed. I purchased the Winchester sisters' contracts from you." Quinn's voice remained even. "Miss Molly has transformed our ranch accounts with her financial acumen, and Miss Emma's talents with needle and thread have been invaluable. I consider the money extremely well spent." Porter's smile didn't reach his eyes. "How fortunate for all concerned." "Yes, it is," Quinn agreed. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Miss Winchester promised to show me the prize pies before the judging begins." With a hand lightly at the small of her back, Quinn guided Molly away from Porter. "Thank you," she said when they were out of earshot. "That man still makes my skin crawl." Quinn's jaw was tight. "He's a vulture. I've heard stories about how he acquires those contracts, predatory loans, manipulated terms, harassment of vulnerable families." "That describes our experience precisely," Molly confirmed. "After Father died, he gave us 3 days to settle the debt before seizing everything, including Mother's wedding ring." Quinn's expression darkened further. "I should have known. I'm sorry you had to see him today." Molly squared her shoulders. "It's all right, he can't hurt us anymore. Besides, it's a beautiful day and I refuse to let him spoil it." Quinn's face softened. "That's my brave Molly." The rest of the afternoon passed pleasantly. They watched sack races and pie-eating contests, applauded the children's choir, and listened to a reading of the Declaration of Independence by the schoolmaster. As evening approached, tables were cleared away and a space opened for dancing as musicians set up on the platform. Lanterns were lit as twilight descended, casting a warm glow over the festivities. The musicians began with a lively reel that brought couples flooding to the makeshift dance floor. "May I have this dance, Miss Winchester?" Quinn asked formally, extending his hand. Molly smiled and placed her hand in his. "You may, Mr. Northrop." The dance brought them together and apart, their hands touching briefly before the steps separated them again. Quinn moved with surprising grace for such a tall man, and Molly followed his lead easily. When the music ended, they remained on the floor for the next dance, and the next. During a pause while the musicians refreshed themselves, Molly spotted Emma and Thomas sitting close together on a bench, deep in conversation. Thomas said something that made Emma laugh, her face tilted up to his with undisguised affection. "They make a handsome couple," Quinn observed, following her gaze. "Yes, they do," Molly agreed. "Emma deserves happiness after all she's been through." Quinn's hand found hers. "As do you." Before she could respond, the musicians struck up again, this time a slower waltz. Quinn drew her closer, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers as they moved in perfect harmony. The propriety of their previous dances gave way to something more intimate, still respectable but charged with unspoken feelings. "I've been thinking," Quinn said quietly as they circled the floor, "about your contract." Molly tensed slightly. "What about it?" "I want to tear it up." She looked up at him in surprise. "What? The contract? I want to destroy it. Set you and Emma free of any legal obligation." Molly's heart raced. "But why now?" His eyes, so blue in the lantern light, held her steadily. "Because I want there to be no question of inequality between us. Because I want anything that happens next to be your free choice, not influenced by any sense of debt or obligation." The music continued around them, but Molly barely heard it. "Quinn, are you saying—" "Not yet," he interrupted gently. "First comes freedom. Then, when the time is right, I'll ask the question I've been wanting to ask since the church social." His hand tightened on hers. "If that's something you might welcome." Tears pricked at Molly's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "That's something I would welcome very much." The dance ended, and they stood for a moment in the center of the floor, oblivious to the couples moving around them. Then Quinn offered her his arm, and they walked to where Mrs. Perkins sat fanning herself. "I believe I promised you lemonade," Quinn said. "Let me fetch some for both of you." As he moved toward the refreshment table, Mrs. Perkins patted the seat beside her. "Well, my dear, it seems our Quinn has finally found his way back to happiness." Molly sat, her cheeks flushed from dancing and emotion. "He's a good man, Mrs. Perkins." "The best," the older woman agreed. "And he deserves someone who sees that goodness, who brings out the best in him." She squeezed Molly's hand. "As you do." Quinn returned with glasses of lemonade, and they sat together watching the dancing, commenting on the festivities and enjoying the perfect summer evening. Later, as fireworks exploded over the town, painting the night sky with brilliant colors, Quinn's hand found Molly's again, their fingers intertwining in a promise of things to come. The journey back to North Star Ranch was made under a canopy of stars, the wagons rolling slowly along the quiet road. Emma had fallen asleep against Mrs. Perkins' shoulder, exhausted from dancing and excitement. Molly sat beside Quinn on the driver's seat, their shoulders touching, a comfortable silence between them. "Tomorrow," Quinn said softly as the ranch buildings came into view, "I'll destroy those contracts. You and Emma will be free women, welcome to stay at North Star as long as you wish, but under no obligation to do so." Molly looked up at his profile, strong and sure against the starlit sky. "And if we wish to stay forever," he turned to her, his eyes reflecting the starlight, "then I would be the happiest man in the Wyoming Territory." The next morning, in the study where they had spent so many hours working together, Quinn took the contracts from his desk drawer. Molly and Emma stood watching as he tore the documents into pieces, the sound of tearing paper unexpectedly emotional. "There," he said, dropping the fragments into the wastebasket. "It's done. You're free." Emma rushed forward to hug him, her eyes bright with tears. "Thank you, Quinn, for everything." "You're welcome, little one," he said affectionately, returning her embrace. When Emma stepped back, Quinn turned to Molly. "A word in private." Emma exchanged a knowing look with Mrs. Perkins, who had appeared in the doorway. "I think I'll help Mrs. Perkins with the preserves," she said, practically skipping from the room. When they were alone, Quinn took both of Molly's hands in his. "Now there's nothing between us but what we choose." he said softly. No contracts, no obligations, no debts. Just two people who found each other against all odds, Molly added. Exactly. He took a deep breath. Molly Winchester, I love you. I think I've loved you since I saw you standing proud and protective beside your sister, even in the worst circumstances. These months with you have been the happiest of my life. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Joy bubbled up inside her, as bright and warm as the summer sun. Yes, Quinn Northrop, with all my heart, yes. He gathered her into his arms, and when their lips met for the first time, it felt like coming home. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and then to town. Emma was ecstatic, Mrs. Perkins smug with satisfaction, and the ranch hands pleased for their boss. Letters of congratulation arrived from neighbors, and even Mrs. Harrington sent a note expressing her delight at the match. She's just happy to be proven right about our living arrangements, Molly laughed as she read the letter. Let her think what she likes, Quinn replied, dropping a kiss on her forehead. As long as you're happy, nothing else matters. They set the wedding date for September, when the most pressing ranch work would be completed, and before winter weather made travel difficult for guests. Emma threw herself into creating a wedding dress for Molly, working with fine fabric Quinn ordered specially from Denver. August passed in a whirl of preparations and happiness. Quinn and Molly continued their evening conversations on the porch, but now they often ended with lingering kisses and whispered promises for the future. They spoke of children, of expanding the ranch, of growing old together at North Star. One evening in late August, as they sat watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Quinn handed Molly a small velvet box. This was my mother's, he said, as she opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a perfect sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. My father gave it to her when they homesteaded this land. I've kept it safe, waiting for the right person to wear it. Tears filled Molly's eyes as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It's beautiful, Quinn. I'll treasure it always. Not as much as I treasure you, he replied, drawing her close for a kiss. As September approached, an unexpected letter arrived from the east. Molly recognized her uncle's handwriting immediately and opened it with trepidation. She and Emma had written to him after their father's death, but his reply had come too late to prevent the auction. "Oh my," she gasped as she read the contents. "What is it, dear?" Mrs. Perkins asked, pausing in her bread-making. "Our uncle has finally settled father's estate. There was an investment that paid out after all, a small one, but enough that Emma and I each have a modest inheritance." Molly looked up in wonder. "We're not destitute after all." The news brought mixed emotions. On one hand, if the money had arrived earlier, they might have avoided the auction entirely. On the other hand, had events not unfolded as they did, Molly would never have met Quinn, never have found this happiness. "God works in mysterious ways," Mrs. Perkins observed. "Sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures." Molly couldn't help but agree. The path that had brought her to North Star had been painful, but the destination was worth every step. On the morning of the wedding, the ranch was a flurry of activity. Guests began arriving early, neighbors, townspeople, and even a few of Quinn's relatives from Colorado. The ceremony would take place in the garden, which was in full late summer glory with roses, sunflowers, and asters in bloom. In the upstairs bedroom that she would occupy for the last time as Molly Winchester, she stood still as Emma, and Mrs. Perkins fussed with her dress and hair. The gown was a masterpiece of Emma's skill, ivory satin with delicate lace at the neckline and cuffs, the skirt falling in elegant folds to the floor. "You look beautiful," Emma said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Like a princess in a fairy tale. Thanks to your talented hands, Molly replied, hugging her sister. I can't believe this is happening. Mrs. Perkins tucked a sprig of white roses into Molly's dark hair. Believe it, my dear, you've earned this happiness, both of you. A knock at the door revealed Thomas, looking handsome in a new suit. Reverend Miller says they're ready whenever you are, he announced, his eyes widening as he took in Molly's appearance. Wow, Quinn might faint when he sees you. They all laughed, the sound bright with joy. Emma took Thomas's arm, and Mrs. Perkins led the way downstairs and through the house to the back door that opened onto the garden. The guests rose as Molly appeared. At the end of the flower-lined path stood Quinn, tall and handsome in a black suit, his face lighting up as he saw her. Beside him was the foreman, Mr. Davis, serving as best man, and on the other side stood Reverend Miller with his prayer book. With no father to give her away, Molly walked alone down the path, her steps sure and steady. This was no traditional Eastern wedding with its rigid formalities. This was a frontier celebration, honest and heartfelt, exactly as she wanted it to be. When she reached Quinn, he took her hands in his. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Miller began, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple and moving. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises to love, honor, and cherish each other through all of life's joys and sorrows. When Quinn slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, Molly felt her heart might burst with happiness. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Miller declared. "Quinn, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was sweet and tender, filled with promise. When they turned to face their guests, the applause was thunderous, led by an exuberant Emma. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. Tables were set up under the trees, laden with food prepared by Mrs. Perkins and the women of nearby ranches. There was dancing to fiddle and guitar, speeches and toasts, laughter and a few happy tears. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. Molly found a quiet moment with Emma near the rose garden. "Are you happy, Emma?" she asked, putting an arm around her sister's shoulders. "Impossibly happy," Emma replied. "I love it here, Molly. I love the people, the work, even the isolation. It feels like we've found where we belong." "I feel the same way." Molly squeezed her sister's hand. "And now you have your inheritance to consider. You could go back east, finish your education, see something of the world." Emma shook her head decisively. "My place is here. The money is a blessing, but it doesn't change that." A blush crept up her cheeks. "Besides, Thomas has asked me to walk out with him properly. He wants to court me with Quinn's blessing." Molly smiled, unsurprised. "And what did you say?" "I said yes, of course." Emma's eyes sparkled. "He wants to build a small house on the north section of the ranch. Quinn has offered him the land as a wedding present when the time comes." "That would be wonderful," Molly said sincerely. "To have you nearby always." "Like a proper family," Emma agreed. "Which reminds me, Thomas is waiting for the next dance, and I believe your husband is looking for you." Molly turned to see Quinn approaching, his face alight with love. "There you are. I thought I'd lost my wife already." "Never," Molly promised, taking his outstretched hand. "I'm right where I belong." As night deepened, the guests gradually departed until only the household remained, tired but content. Quinn and Molly bid good night to Mrs. Perkins and Emma before climbing the stairs to the master bedroom, their bedroom now. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Molly rested her head on Quinn's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Happy, Mrs. Northrop," he murmured, stroking her hair. Completely, Mr. Northrop. She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. When I think of how we began, me bound and standing on an auction platform, you a stranger bidding for my contract, it seems impossible that we've ended up here like this. Not ended, Quinn corrected, pulling her close. Just beginning. Autumn brought golden light and cooler days to North Star Ranch. The cattle were rounded up from summer pastures, hay was stored for winter feed, and the garden yielded its final harvest. Life settled into a new rhythm for the newlyweds, their days filled with work and their nights with each other. Molly took to marriage with the same determination and intelligence she brought to everything. She continued to manage the ranch's accounts and correspondence, but now as Quinn's full partner rather than his employee. They made decisions together, discussing everything from livestock purchases to building repairs over breakfast or during evening rides around the property. Their happiness seemed to radiate outward, influencing everyone around them. Mrs. Perkins hummed as she worked, declaring that the house had finally become a true home again. The ranch hands noted that the boss smiled more often, was quicker with praise, slower to anger when things went wrong. Emma and Thomas's courtship progressed steadily through the fall. He began construction on a small house about a half-mile from the main ranch house, working on it during evenings and free days. Emma divided her time between helping Mrs. Perkins, sewing for the household, and assisting Thomas with plans for their future home. In late October, as the first snow dusted the distant mountains, Quinn and Molly sat before the fire in their bedroom, discussing the day's events. Henderson's offered a fair price for the yearlings, Quinn said, referring to a cattle buyer from Kansas City. Better than I expected given the market this year. That's good news, Molly replied, somewhat distractedly. Quinn set aside his ledger, noticing her preoccupation. What is it? You've been quiet all evening. Molly looked up from her sewing, a small smile playing at her lips. I've been thinking about the future. Oh, he moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. What about it? She took his hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. About how it might be expanding sooner than we expected. It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Quinn's face transformed with wonder. Molly, are you certain? She nodded, her eyes bright. Mrs. Perkins confirmed my suspicions today. She says I'm about 2 months along. We should have a child by late spring. Quinn gathered her into his arms, his joy too great for words. When he finally found his voice, it was thick with emotion. I never thought I could be this happy, first you and now a child. Our child, Molly said softly. The first of many, I hope. As many as you want, Quinn promised, kissing her with infinite tenderness. They shared their news with Emma and Mrs. Perkins the next morning. Emma squealed with delight and immediately began planning baby clothes, while Mrs. Perkins nodded with satisfaction. I thought as much when you couldn't stomach the bacon last week, she said smugly. This house needs the sound of children's laughter. It's been too quiet for too long. As winter settled over the prairie, the North Star Ranch became a haven of warmth and anticipation. Quinn insisted that Molly rest more and lifted the heaviest of her duties, though she protested that pregnancy wasn't an illness. Mrs. Perkins and Emma fussed over her, preparing special dishes when morning sickness made eating difficult and knitting tiny garments for the coming baby. Christmas was especially joyful that year. They decorated the house with pine boughs and red ribbons, and Quinn brought home the largest tree that would fit in the parlor. Emma outdid herself with gifts for everyone, using her inheritance to purchase special items from a catalog and having them shipped from Denver. On Christmas Eve, they gathered in the parlor after a festive dinner. A fire crackled in the hearth, and candles on the tree cast a warm glow over the room. Outside, snow fell gently, covering the prairie in a pristine white blanket. "I have an announcement," Thomas said after they had exchanged gifts. He took Emma's hand, looking nervous but determined. "With Quinn's blessing, I've asked Emma to marry me, and she said yes." Congratulations and hugs followed. Emma's face glowed with happiness as she showed off the simple gold band Thomas had placed on her finger. "We thought perhaps a spring wedding," she said. "After the baby comes, so Molly can stand up with me." "It will be perfect," Molly assured her, embracing her sister. "I'm so happy for you, Emma." Later, as they prepared for bed, Quinn wrapped his arms around Molly from behind, his hands resting on the gentle swell of her belly. "1 year ago I was alone in this house, convinced I would never know family happiness again," he murmured against her hair. "Now look at us married, a baby on the way, Emma engaged. It's more than I ever dreamed possible." Molly leaned back against him, savoring his strength and warmth. "When I stood on that auction platform, I thought my life was over. I never imagined it was just beginning." He turned her in his arms to face him. "Do you remember what I said that day? You'll both have a home with me." "I remember," she said softly. "It seemed impossible to believe then." "And now," Molly reached up to touch his beloved face, "now it seems impossible that we could ever be anywhere else." As winter gave way to spring, life at North Star Ranch continued to flourish. The cattle herds grew, the fields greened, and Molly's belly swelled with their growing child. Quinn was attentive and protective, sometimes excessively so, which both touched and amused Molly. "I can still walk to the garden, Quinn," she protested one April morning when he insisted on accompanying her. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." "Humor me," he said, tucking her hand into the crook of his arm. "It's my first time at this." "Mine too," she reminded him with a laugh. The baby, a boy they named James Allen Northrop after both their fathers, arrived in early May on a perfect spring morning. The birth was long but uncomplicated, with Mrs. Perkins serving as midwife and Quinn pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door until Emma finally took pity on him and allowed him in to see his wife and newborn son. The moment Quinn held James in his arms, his face softened with a love so profound it brought tears to Molly's eyes. "He's perfect," Quinn whispered, gently touching the dark fuzz on the baby's head, "just like his mother." Emma's wedding followed a month later, a joyful celebration that united not only the young couple, but also two families who had become integral to North Star Ranch. Thomas's father gave the bride away, and Molly stood as matron of honor, baby James sleeping peacefully in Quinn's arms throughout the ceremony. The newlyweds moved into their completed home, close enough for daily visits but far enough for privacy. Emma continued to help with household sewing and cooking, while Thomas worked alongside his father managing the ranch's expanding operations. Life settled into a new pattern, days filled with the work of the ranch and the care of a growing baby, nights with quiet conversations and peaceful sleep. James thrived, a happy, healthy child with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. On the anniversary of their wedding, Quinn surprised Molly with a trip to Denver, their first journey away from the ranch since their marriage. Mrs. Perkins assured them she could manage both the household and baby James for a few days, and Emma promised to visit daily to help. "You need time just for each other," Mrs. Perkins insisted. "Every marriage does. Go enjoy the city." The train journey was a novelty after months of ranch isolation. They stayed in a fine hotel, attended the theater, and dined in elegant restaurants. Quinn bought Molly a beautiful blue dress that matched her eyes, and she purchased books for their growing library at home. On their last night in Denver, as they lay together in the luxurious hotel bed, Quinn propped himself on one elbow to look at his wife. "Happy," he asked, tracing the curve of her cheek with one finger. Completely, she answered truthfully. Though I miss James. As do I, Quinn admitted. But it's good to remember we're not just parents, but husband and wife. I never forget that, Molly assured him, drawing him down for a kiss. When they returned to North Star, James greeted them with excited babbles and reaching arms. The ranch looked more beautiful than ever in the golden light of late summer, the house more welcoming. I enjoyed Denver, Molly said as they stood on the porch watching the sunset that evening, James sleeping against Quinn's shoulder. But this is where I belong. Quinn's free arm encircled her waist, drawing her close. With me, he said softly. Always, she promised. The years that followed brought continued happiness to North Star Ranch. The cattle business prospered under Quinn's careful management, allowing for improvements to the property and comfortable living for all who called it home. Emma and Thomas welcomed a daughter, then a son, making James a proud cousin and playmate. Molly gave birth to a daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, when James was 3, and another son, William Quinn, 2 years after that. The house rang with children's laughter, just as Mrs. Perkins had wished. The elderly housekeeper remained the heart of the household, though she gradually relinquished the heavier work to younger helpers. I'm not leaving this world until I see these children grown, she declared on her 75th birthday. Someone has to keep you all in line. Quinn and Molly's relationship deepened with each passing year. The passionate love of their early marriage evolved into something even stronger, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared goals, and unwavering commitment. They faced challenges together. Drought years that threatened the herd, a fire that destroyed part of the barn, the illness that nearly took young William at age 4. Through it all, their bond only strengthened. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they hosted a celebration that brought together the entire community, ranch hands and their families, neighbors from miles around, townspeople from Redemption Springs. The ranch had become known for its hospitality as well as its fine cattle, and Quinn had earned respect throughout the territory as a fair businessman and good neighbor. As twilight fell on the gathering, Quinn found Molly at the edge of the garden, watching their children play with their cousins. 10 years, he said, slipping his arm around her waist. It seems both forever and no time at all. Molly leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. At 32, she was in the prime of her life, her beauty enhanced by confidence and contentment. The best 10 years imaginable. Do you ever think about that day in Redemption Springs? Quinn asked. The auction. Sometimes, she admitted. It seems like another lifetime, another Molly. I thank God every day that I was there, Quinn said quietly, that I found you and Emma. Molly turned in his arms to face him. So do I. What began as the worst day of my life became the path to the greatest happiness I've known. Quinn kissed her tenderly, then rested his forehead against hers. I promised you a home that day. And you've given us so much more, Molly replied. A family, a future, a life filled with love. As night fell over North Star Ranch, stars appeared in the vast prairie sky, the same stars that had witnessed their journey from strangers bound by a contract to soul mates bound by love. In the distance, their children's laughter mingled with music from the celebration, a joyful sound that echoed across the land that had become their legacy. Quinn took Molly's hand, and together they walked back toward the light and warmth of the home they had built, not just the sturdy house of wood and stone, but the stronger dwelling place of shared dreams and abiding love. In that moment, with her husband beside her and their children healthy and happy, Molly knew a contentment that the frightened young woman on the auction platform could never have imagined. Life had taken her on an unexpected journey, from desperate circumstances to profound joy. proving once again that even the darkest beginnings could lead to the brightest of futures. And as Quinn had promised that day in Redemption Springs, they had indeed found a home with him, a home built not of mere walls and roof, but of commitment, courage, and an enduring love that would sustain them all the days of their lives.